opportunity to speak to the Trans-Pacific Partnership, to speak to what is the largest trade agreement in the world, one in which Canada can show leadership. In fact, I have always believed that Canada must be a leader, not a laggard on trade.
Absolutely.
And why trade? We have to ask ourselves the question. Well, I think most Canadians understand that Canada is one of the great trading nations of the world. We operate today in a globalized trading environment, a globalized marketplace. Now, whether you believe in globalization or not, no one is going to be able to turn back the hands of time on globalization. It is a fact. Canada needs to adapt. Now, if we were going to promote trade, the first place we'd want to do that, of course, is under the World Trade Organization, which is the preeminent forum in the world for rules-based trade. But with the rise of the emerging economies, there's been a significant shift in the economic balance within the global economy. The emerging economies are flexing their muscles. It has become much, much more difficult to actually make headway in establishing new rules for trade at the World Trade Organization. And as that organization has become somewhat comatose and unable or unwilling to move forward with new rules to adapt to a rapidly evolving global trade environment, Canada has to seek new ways of promoting its trade interests around the world. How do we do that? Well, there's a number of different ways. We can certainly negotiate bilateral trade agreements and investment agreements, and we've done that with many countries around the world. We can get involved in plurilateral negotiations, and Canada is involved in those as well. There are three specifically I'm thinking of. The Environmental Goods Agreement, where we have like-minded, willing partners negotiating a global agreement on services, on technology, and also on environmental goods. But we also get involved in regional trade negotiations. If you're not going to make headway in the short or medium term at the World Trade Organization, the best way to do this then is to bring together like-minded trade partners, like-minded investment partners, and negotiate an agreement that not only eliminates tariffs on goods, but also eliminates many of the non-tariff barriers behind the borders, the ones that frustrate our exporters so much. And that's essentially what the Trans-Pacific Partnership does. Who is the Trans-Pacific Partnership? 12 like-minded partners. It's not only Canada, it's the United States and Mexico, our NAFTA partners. Our free trade partners, Peru and Chile, are members of that partnership. But then there are countries that we don't have free trade agreements with who are now part of the TPP. Countries like Australia, like New Zealand, like Malaysia, like Brunei, like Vietnam. And I would be remiss if I didn't actually mention the third largest economy in the world, Japan. This agreement is truly the largest trade agreement of its kind in the world. It represents somewhere in the order of 800 million consumers, represents somewhere around $29 trillion of the global economy. Canada needs to be part of this, and what we are suggesting to the government, that rather than hiding behind the skirts of further lengthy consultations, that the government now stand up and declare its support for the TPP. And that's what this motion does. And just to be very clear, I'd like to repeat for the information, not only of the members within this House, but also for the many viewers who are watching these proceedings. This is what the motion does. First of all, the House agrees that A, growing protectionism threatens the global economy. B, the Trans-Pacific Partnership is the best opportunity to strengthen the multilateral trading system and develop rules that protect Canada's economic interests. C, the Liberal government must send a strong signal to Canadian businesses and its closest allies that it supports international commerce. D, Canada's position on the TPP should not depend on political developments to the south of us in the United States. E, the Liberal government should stop needlessly prolonging consultations on this important agreement. And finally, F, the Liberal government should declare Canada's final position on the TPP in time for the North American Leaders Summit on June 29th. Now, the Liberal government has gone out of its way to try to proclaim its bona fides on trade. Their record is quite poor. You may recall, Mr. Speaker, over 13 years under the Chrétien and Martin governments, they got virtually nothing done on the trade file. It was only in 2006 that our former Conservative government embarked upon the most ambitious trade agenda Canada had ever seen. And we not only embarked upon that plan, we actually executed on that plan. Over a short period of less than 10 years, our Conservative government was able to conclude negotiations on trade agreements with an astonishing 46 different countries. The previous Liberal government's record was 3 small trade agreements. We got left far behind within the global trading environment. Now, under our government, of course, we caught up very rapidly, but we're not finished. And now the torch has been passed to the Liberal government, and they've claimed that they are supporters of free trade and they're supporters of trade agreements. Well, let's see them stand up in this House and support this agreement. One of the reasons why it's important Canada be part of the TPP is that if we're not part of this, our North American trading preferences with our NAFTA partners, Mexico and US, will very rapidly be undermined. Right now, we have highly integrated supply chains across our borders where we trade freely amongst ourselves. And that is a platform also for us exporting goods to the rest of the world. Because not only do we compete with the United States and Mexico, we also do business together. When you look at the auto industry, the typical car that comes off the assembly line, there are parts within that auto that have crossed our Canada-US border, Canada-Mexico border more than 7 times. So you can see how these parts, these manufacturing inputs flow across borders seamlessly to create prosperity for our country and for our NAFTA partners. If we're not part of the TPP, very quickly it will be the United States and Mexico that pick up many of our trade opportunities within the Asia-Pacific region. We will lose out. We will also see our investment preferences disappear very rapidly. Think about it, Mr. Speaker. If Canada is not part of the TPP, but the United States and Mexico are, and Mexico already has a trade agreement with the EU, the United States will very quickly have one under the TTIP. Think of where investment would flow. Someone making a decision to, say, invest in the auto industry. They are going to invest in a jurisdiction that has the best access, free trade access to markets around the world. So the United States and Mexico would have access to the European Union. They have access within the North American marketplace under NAFTA, and they have access now to the Asia-Pacific region. Canada would not have that kind of broad access. Where's investment going to flow? Not to Canada. So there's a huge risk of Canada being on the outside looking in, seeing its trade opportunities rapidly eroded around the world, seeing our investment advantages rapidly eroded. And let me give you an example, Mr. Speaker, of where this happened and why Canada has to be so assertive in staying ahead of the curve when it comes to trade. You may recall, Mr. Speaker, that the United States, the European Union, and Canada were all negotiating a free trade agreement with South Korea. We're doing it at the same time. And then something happened in Canada. We had the BSE crisis, which hit our cattle and beef industry. And South Korea and countries around the world closed their markets temporarily to us until we could assure them that our beef was safe, that it was healthy to eat. And then those markets opened, except for 2 markets, Taiwan and South Korea. And South Korea said, no, we don't think that your beef is safe to eat. They were wrong. Ours is the best beef in the world. However, South Korea, for its own purposes, probably protectionist purposes, chose not to open up the market. So we had to take them to the World Trade Organization. We had to do dispute settlement. And at the end of the day, of course, Canada won. But in the meantime, we lost a couple of years of negotiations on a broader trade agreement. But of course, the European Union and the US, they got their deals in place. Those deals were in effect in 2012. In the subsequent year, when Canada did not have a trade agreement with South Korea, but EU and US did, Canada lost $1.5 billion worth of exports to South Korea. That's the cost we pay when we don't actively negotiate open markets around the world for Canadian exporters, for Canadian manufacturers. And that is the risk that this Liberal government takes by not declaring its support for the Trans-Pacific Partnership. We want to stay ahead of the curve. We want to be leaders, not laggards on trade. That is our reputation over the last 10 years, and very quickly we see that reputation waning under this new Liberal government. Now, we have had strong support from stakeholders across Canada. As you know, Mr. Speaker, when we were in government, we worked very closely with the provinces and territories to make sure they understood what it was we were negotiating in the TPP, and make sure they understood the benefits to each one of their provinces and territories. We also consulted broadly with stakeholder groups, industry organizations across the country. And overwhelmingly, they supported Canada being part of the TPP. And overwhelmingly, they supported the outcome of the TPP when it was finally announced. So much so that even the supply-managed sector, which many had said are going to go to the barricades on the TPP, they're going to hate this agreement because we're providing some marginal extra access to the Canadian marketplace for products such as chicken, eggs, turkeys, hatching eggs, and dairy. They would not like this deal. But at the end of the day, when we actually announced it, and we had provided them with assurances this was not going to decimate their industry, they saw the deal in front of them and they went, hey, this Conservative government actually negotiated a pretty darn good deal. The access was limited to very small amounts coming across the border in addition to what access they already had. And in fact, I've spoken to those organizations since, and they will very quietly admit that the agreement actually ended up being much better than they had expected, that we'd done a phenomenal job of negotiating an outcome that serves their industry interests. And you may recall, Mr. Speaker, we not only were able to minimize the impacts on those industries, but we also provided two packages. One was a compensation package to compensate those industries for any loss in quota value suffered as a result of opening the market a little bit more for those products. And of course, the industries embraced that. But we did something else. Oh, by the way, the compensation that we announced, which we believed was fair, which those industries embraced fully, that compensation package is now in doubt under this new Liberal government, which has always stood up and said, oh, we support supply management. The Minister of Agriculture, almost daily in this House, is asked about supply management and about compensation. He stands up, we strongly support supply management, but they won't actually commit to the compensation package that was negotiated as part of the TPP outcome. The same thing is true on mitigation measures. As you know, our American friends are very good at exploiting loopholes in our trade laws. And what they would do is they would, for example, they couldn't get large amounts of broilers, chicken, into Canada. So what they would do is they would create sauce packs, because the World Trade Organization rules in our NAFTA agreement aren't 100% clear on whether sauce packs are included or are prohibited. And so they would send these sauce packs across the border, circumventing the spirit of our custom controls. And there's many other of these loopholes that our friends to the south were exploiting. And we said to the industry, you know what? We are going to do everything we can to plug those loopholes. And we came up with a package, a set of promises that we were going to undertake to address those challenges. Well, no sooner had the new Liberal government been elected, they were questioning whether, in fact, they would actually be implementing those mitigation measures. Again, the industry, the Supply Managed 5, are very upset. They won't get assurances on the compensation package, and the federal government has not been moving forward with actually addressing the mitigation measures that had been promised to them. Now, Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister has boasted that his government is a champion of trade. And over the last 6 months, sadly, we have seen virtually no progress, no clear pronouncement on whether they support the TPP. In fact, I've been looking for any new trade agreements that they've started negotiating. There aren't any that I can tell. I'm looking for new international investment treaties that they might be negotiating. I'm not aware of any. So where's this claim of being champions of trade? What they have done, they've sent a chill into our Canadian investment market and into the international investment market. What they've done is they've increased taxes on Canadians. They refuse to reduce the taxes on small businesses in Canada, breaking an election promise. What they've done is they've added more red tape, and even yesterday in this House, I spoke about how this Liberal government and a private member are trying to impose additional red tape on our small businesses. And what's the result? Despite our low dollar, our exports have flagged terribly. In fact, I have the statistics, the most recent statistics, from the Trade Minister's own department. You know, in January, exports were $35 billion. That's just exports to the U.S. In February, those went down $2 billion. In March, those exports went down $2.5 billion. It's a terrible record over the last 6 months for this Liberal government. And we know that the Prime Minister has been hobnobbing with President Obama. We know that the Trade Minister has been traveling all over the United States, going on talk shows, embarrassing herself there, talking supposedly about trade. If her performance is any indicator, Canadians would be well served if she actually stayed at home and focused on the work that has to be done here to promote our trade interests, because she's not getting the job done internationally. So there's a tremendous failure on the part of this Liberal government to actually live up to its promises on trade. Beyond that, of course, when we look at some of the other challenges facing Canada around the world, we can't count on a low dollar to sustain our competitiveness. We have to make sure we continue to open up markets all around the world. And let me say this, Mr. Speaker, for the Liberals to wait for the U.S. to ratify TPP is an abject abdication of their responsibility to be leaders, not laggards, in trade. What we are doing, Mr. Speaker, is calling upon this Liberal government to move forward, boldly pronounce at the Three Amigos Summit on June 29th that Canada will be supporting the TPP. President Obama has done that. The United States has already said, we support this TPP. Here we are as Canadians, and our government just won't tell Canadians where they stand. Can you imagine the leadership we would show by standing up and saying, you know what, we believe trade is good for Canada, we believe open markets around the world are good for Canada, and we support this largest trade agreement of its kind in the world, and we're part of it. We're setting the rules for 21st century trade within the Asia-Pacific region. Wouldn't that be an amazing pronouncement to make? Because right now, it's not looking good on the Liberal side when it comes to trade. Declining trade performance, declining investment performance. This is one thing we can do to actually generate this thing that is perhaps the most significant driver of economic prosperity in Canada. So, Mr. Speaker, it's no longer appropriate for this Liberal government to hide behind the skirts of consultations. There were comprehensive consultations that took place before the agreement was signed. There have been comprehensive consultations that have taken place post-TPP being concluded. It's time to step up and let the world know, let Canadians know, let our partners know, our allies know where we stand on trade. So, what will this achieve? It's going to assist the U.S. in its own ongoing work of ratifying the agreement. It will restore waning public confidence in the Liberal government's commitment to a robust trade agenda, and it will restore Canada's reputation as a trustworthy global leader on trade, not a laggard. So, Mr. Speaker, I'm very pleased to be able to promote this agreement. It will be a transformational agreement for Canadians. It will be a transformational agreement for exporters, but it will also be a transformational agreement for Canada's consumers who will benefit from lower prices because of the elimination of tariffs. So I strongly encourage the Liberal government, step up, speak to this agreement and say, yes, we support the TPP.